One phrase from a cleaning lady saved a billionaire from a fatal mistake. Why did he listen to her? Good day. Write in the comments from which part of the world you are watching us. Don't forget to subscribe and support the video with a like. Alexander Crow, 45, owner of the transnational corporation Crow Trans Global, Bijou Dim, stood at the window of his office on the 80th floor of the Empire State Building. Tower, New York City, spread out below him, breathing lights and noise. This view, his view, was both a symbol of success and a reminder of the price that had to be paid. Crow was tall, trim, with a keen eye and a strong jaw. His grey Brioni suit fitted him perfectly. He was woken every morning by a personal trainer, a nutritionist planned his meals, and a stylist selected his clothes. Crow lived in a world of efficiency and control. Today, signing a contract with Global Energy, the takeover of a small but promising company that owns unique green energy technologies. The deal amount is astronomical, the risks are colossal, but Crow was not afraid. He is a business shark. The office smelled of expensive cognac and a slight odor of bleach. Crow winced. He hated the smell of cheap cleaning products. In the reception area, lawyers, financiers, PR managers were waiting, the whole team ready to sign. The clock showed 2 minutes to 11. At that moment, a woman in a blue coat and rubber gloves emerged from the back room. Grace Miller, a 38-year-old cleaner who had worked at Crow Trans for the past 6 years. No one noticed her. Part of the interior, like vases of flowers. Crow always tried to ignore her. She seemed like a fragment of another poor life. Grace approached awkwardly, as if overcoming an invisible barrier. "Mr. Crow," she whispered in a trembling voice, "don't sign this contract." Crow froze, stunned. "What did you say?" "Don't sign. He's bad." "Do you understand business, Mrs. Miller?" he asked sarcastically. "No, but it's a rotten contract." Something in her sincere gaze made him stop. "Do you know anything specific?" "No, just don't." "Please." Time was running out. People in the waiting room began to whisper. Crow took a deep breath. Cancel the deal. Signing. Until clarification. Silence fell across the corridor. Chief Financial Officer Daniel Grant asked nervously, "Are you sure? These are huge losses." "I know. I'm not ready to take risks now." Crow turned to Grace, meeting her gaze. She nodded silently and disappeared behind the service door. The owner of the holding remained at the window. The view of Manhattan seemed different. The triumph was gone. Anxiety and curiosity remained. Why did I listen to the cleaning lady? What will happen now? Crow spent a sleepless night, turning over in his mind the possible consequences of his actions. In the early morning, he called an emergency meeting. Lawyers and analysts urgently reviewed the contract. The room was filled with tension. The sounds of keyboards and the rustling of papers mingled with heavy sighs. By midday, Senior Attorney Edward Harris approached Crow's desk, his face pale. "Mr. Crow, we have discovered a serious problem." The contract contained a hidden clause that would transfer all responsibility for possible environmental and financial risks to our corporation. The losses could have been colossal. Crow felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He remembered the look in the cleaning lady's eyes, her sincerity and simplicity that somehow convinced him to stop. Now he knew he had made the right decision, although he didn't fully understand why. Grace Miller didn't think of herself as anything special. At 38, she had long since gotten used to working on the invisible front, mop, bucket, rag. For years she had cleaned dozens of offices, and not always the same one. The company's management often transferred her from floor to floor, from one client to another. One day, 2 weeks ago, she was covering for a sick colleague in the building where the law firm Dalton & Price was located. It was there, in the evening hours, while Grace was wiping down the glass walls of the conference room, that she overheard a strange conversation. "If Crow signs, he will become the owner of all the debts," said the young man with the sharp voice. "And in Appendix G7, there is a special clause hidden. They will not even notice. All environmental responsibility will fall on Crow Trans." "The main thing is that no one makes a fuss. Everything will be done legally," the second one answered. "Nobody listens to cleaners, right?" Grace hid behind the screen. She didn't understand all the subtleties, but something in the intonations of these people was disgusting. They were talking about a trap for someone important. She did nothing then. She didn't know how or who to tell, but when she found herself in Mr. Crow's office 2 weeks later, hearing the name of the counterparty, Global Energy, something clicked inside her. This was that very conversation, that very deal. Grace couldn't explain everything, but she knew for sure Crow shouldn't sign. And so I decided to speak. Now, watching the events unfold on the screen in her staff cubicle, she felt her heart pounding in unison with the events unfolding. She had done everything right, but what would happen next? The news of the sudden cancellation of the multi-billion-dollar deal had spread through financial publications by the evening of the same day. Crow pulls out of deal at the last minute. Insider threat or personal paranoia? The headlines were full of versions. Panic reigned within the company. The PR department rubbed its hands in frustration, trying to explain the refusal to the partners, who had already begun to prepare a joint press release. The next day at the Empire Building Tower arrived James Street, a senior partner of the law firm representing the interests of Global Energy. He was displeased. Cold, confident, in a perfectly pressed suit with a handkerchief in his breast pocket. His smile did not reach his eyes. "Mr. Crow, we were shocked by your unexpected position. It could cost you your reputation." Crow didn't look away. "My company is more important to me. I don't play roulette, James." "Then maybe we should check if your decision was influenced by external pressure." It sounded like a threat, and to some extent it was. After Street left, Crow called Harris. "Check everything, threats, mergers, legal loopholes, and..." He hesitated. "Find out everything we know about Dalton and Price. I have a bad feeling about this." Meanwhile, an internal investigation had already begun in the building. Who advised stopping the deal? Who leaked the information? Who was the mole? Several heads of the security department were considering the versions. Cameras, entrances, exits. One of the internal security officers soon reported, "Mr. Crow, we have one oddity. On the day the deal was cancelled, one cleaning lady was recorded moving from your floor to the utility corridor next to the conference room. Grace Miller." Crow looked towards the door. "Leave her. Don't touch her for now. Just watch." And for the first time in his life he felt that the answer to the most dangerous mystery might be hidden, not in offices and boardrooms, but in a mop, a quiet voice, and the look of an elderly woman he had never noticed before. Grace noticed a change in looks the next day. The guards stopped greeting her in the elevator. The cleaning colleagues who usually chatted at the coffee counter suddenly fell silent when she approached. Something hung in the air. Something sticky, wary. At lunchtime, when she went into the technical room to get cleaning supplies, the door suddenly closed behind her with a click. There were two people in the room, a man in a security suit and a woman in a jacket with a security badge. "Mrs. Miller," the man began with a falsely polite smile. "We'd like to ask you a few questions." "What's wrong?" Grace, a slender woman in a dark robe with her chestnut-colored hair pulled back into a ponytail, set the bucket down on the floor. "We noticed you moving along the technical corridor on the day the contract was cancelled. This is a standard check. No one is accusing you of anything." The woman took out a tablet. "You were near the conference room. Tell me, did you hear anything unusual?" Grace tried to look calm, but her voice gave her away. "I was just passing by, cleaning, didn't hear anything. Everything is as usual." The man nodded but wrote something down in his notebook. "Okay. But if you remember anything, let me know right away." She left the room feeling as if she had been judged in silence, without a trial or a defense. She walked down the hallway, carrying the bucket, but she felt that eyes were now directed at her. Cameras, people, suspicion. Meanwhile, Crow sat in his office, staring at the screen. He was tormented by a dilemma. He felt that Grace knew more than she was saying, but if she was officially questioned, it could cause a scandal. and if she was ignored, he would be left without answers. The internal conflict of whether to trust a random woman with a rag or to interrogate her with prejudice tormented his mind. He remembered Street's phrase, external pressure. Maybe someone really had planted a signal, but why? Why her? He pressed the call button. Find me a file on Grace Miller, everything, biography, previous jobs, complaints, reviews, and who sent her to clean the 80th floor that day. He wanted to know, because for the first time in his years of running a giant corporation, his gut instinct wasn't screaming profit. It was saying, seek the truth. The dossier lay on Crow's desk like a coiled document from another life. He opened it slowly, unsure whether he was more afraid of seeing nothing or finding something that would change everything. Name, Grace Miller. Age, 38. Education, Technical College, Department of Office Administration. Marital status, widowed, no children. Previous job, college receptionist, logistics coordinator at a charity, then private caregiver for a seriously ill. Relative since 2017, cleaner at Pure Hands Ingots with an appointment at Empire Tower in 2019. Crow flipped through the pages slowly. Everything looked honest, neat, impeccable. But among the dry certificates and questionnaires in the file, there was a photocopy of a letter, handwritten in blue pen on worn paper. Please, if possible, move me off the 40th floor. I don't want to get involved in anything, but I hear things that I don't think should be heard. I don't want to cause trouble, just give me a job where I can stay under the radar. Grace Miller. The letter was more than 5 years old, Crow considered. He felt an uneasy respect for this woman growing inside him, not hysterical, not vindictive, just honest. He pressed the call button. Invite Miss Miller to me, personally. Without security. Grace walked in quietly but confidently. Her face was clean, without makeup. Her shoulders were straight, not hunched over, not downtrodden. It was the first time Crow had seen her like this, alive. Have a seat. She sank into the chair without removing her bag from her shoulder. You already know, right? She said first. I read the letter, an old one. Had you heard anything that scared you? Grace nodded. Then I just left. Pretended I didn't hear. Quit. But this time, I couldn't. Why? She looked straight into the eyes. Because my husband died. Not right away. He was a driver at a construction site, on a project financed by a large corporation. They knew that the equipment was old, that the technology was dangerous, but the contract had a clause that everything was at the contractor's own risk. No one was held responsible. She swallowed, but her eyes remained dry. I kept quiet then. I was afraid of losing any kind of work. I was afraid of being left alone. I stayed, both my job and my husband, but I can't keep quiet any longer. Crow leaned forward. He no longer saw her as a cleaning lady. He saw a person, a system. Someone's conscience. Thank you, Grace. You're welcome, she said quietly. I couldn't have done otherwise anyway. He watched her go, and when the door closed behind her, he turned to the window. New York was as bright as ever. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. The morning began with a sensation. On the front page of the Financial Post, the headline screamed, Crow cancels deal, under pressure from insider. The caption underneath, exclusive. Anonymous source, details inside. Crow read the article standing by the window. Every paragraph was a blow to his reputation. Insider, rumors, primitive interference by lower-level staff. Hints, half-facts, spiced with snide comments about leadership instability. He clenched the newspaper in his fist. Global Energy wasted no time. Half an hour later, his secretary stopped the courier at the reception. He silently handed over a small envelope with the Express Box logo and left. Inside was a regular flash drive and a short note. Before they destroy the evidence, watch this. Don't even trust your own. Crow inserted the flash drive into his laptop, a folder with one video file. He pressed play. The screen shook. The camera was obviously hidden. The frame showed an office with the Dalton and Price logo, 3 men in suits. One of them was James Street. If everything goes as we agreed, Crow will take on all the green toxicity. His lawyers won't even notice. G7 is already soldered in. The rest is a matter of PR. And if he refuses? Someone asked off camera. I will have a story, a leak to the press, and then we'll launch a campaign about staff intervention. Let him justify himself. He won't listen to the cleaning lady, will he? Someone laughed. The video has ended. Crow sat back in his chair, silent. This wasn't just a blow. It was a plot. He turned the video back on. He watched the faces. He listened to the intonations. Disgust rose in his chest, but most of all, pain. Because now he knew Grace was the only one who had been honest with him. He pressed the call button. Harris, now. We're starting our own game, and let those bastards enjoy how it ends. Crow never played openly. But he also did not forget that strength is not in aggression, but in the accuracy of the blow. He had everything: video, time, and motivation. There were only 3 people in the office: Crow, Harris, and a woman in her 40s with a hard look. Ava Singer, a former Pentagon cybersecurity analyst who was now the head of internal compliance at Crowtrans. She was the one he trusted when his reputation was on the line. We have proof, he began, laying out the flash drive. This is James Street, a partner at Dalton and Price, directly discussing the fraud scheme. Ava, having silently watched the video, just nodded. What shall we do? She asked. Softly, but harshly, Crow replied. We'll hit them not on the head, but on their trust in them. Harris intervened. File a lawsuit? First, a leak, Crow said. But not to the press. We'll send copies to the shareholders of Global Energy, unsigned. Let them ask questions themselves. At the same time, a request to the Financial Commission. And then a lawsuit, a big one. A public one? Ava chuckled. And Grace, under protection for now. But I want her to decide for herself whether to speak publicly. The next day, anonymous letters began to be sent to the addresses of the directors of Global Energy. Each one contained a flash drive, a copy of the video, and a note. Think about who represents your interests. The market reacted instantly. Global Energy shares plummeted. Information about a possible conflict of interest within the company leaked to the media. The press pounced on the topic, but Crow remained silent. He didn't give interviews. He didn't comment. He waited. Ava, meanwhile, ensured Grace's reliability. She was transferred to another department, officially at the initiative of management. They provided her with a lawyer and, at Crow's insistence, offered her a bonus, not a small one. But Grace refused the money. I don't need it. I just want to keep my job and know that everything will be fair from now on. Crow smiled sincerely for the first time in a long time. Then I have another proposition for you, he said. I want you to head a small department. Unofficially. Let's call it the Ethics Department. Grace was embarrassed. Me, I am not a specialist. But you are a man who told the truth at the right moment. And there are few like that among my people. Very few. By the evening of the same day, a notice arrived from the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission. A preliminary investigation had been launched against the law firm Dalton and Price and the company Global Energy. Crow stood at the window. His city was glowing as always, but now he felt not power, but control returned over himself, over the truth, and for the first time in a long time, he thought that everything would change, forever. Grace wasn't looking for attention. On the contrary, she wanted everything to go back to normal, the morning shifts, the quiet hallways, the smell of clean floors. But she was being watched now, grudgingly, furtively, as if her name had become code for something dangerous. That evening she was late. One of the new employees was sick and Grace came in to cover. When she went down to the first floor, a man was waiting for her in the empty lobby, tall, in a black jacket with neatly slicked back hair. He was standing near the glass wall, like a random passerby, but when he saw her, he immediately approached her. "Miss Miller," he asked politely, "can I talk to you for a few minutes?" Grace tensed. "Do we know each other?" "No." "But I represent the interests of a private party. I have a proposal." He held out an envelope. Heavy. Inside was cash. "If you refuse to participate in further investigation, silently, just leave Crow-Trans, without scandals, without the press." She slowly took a step back. "Is this a threat?" "We prefer the word alternative." He smiled, but there was not an ounce of goodwill in his eyes. Grace didn't say anything. She just turned around and walked towards the security desk. "Wait," he said. She didn't turn around. A minute later, the man was already detained, and the footage from the cameras was sent to the security department. The next morning, Ava Singer arrived at Grace's house in person, holding a tablet with the report and a cup of coffee. "We've beefed up security," she said. "He's connected to a PR agency working for Global Energy." "They're panicking." "And you?" Grace asked, smiling faintly. "And we have determination. If you are still ready to go to the end, we will go with you." Grace nodded. For the first time in her life, she had a team. The courtroom at the Federal District Court in Manhattan was packed. On either side of the wooden benches were lawyers, reporters, analysts. It was like a theatrical production, where everyone knew their part but not the ending. In the dock are representatives of Crow-Trans Global. Calm, focused, Crow sat in the center next to Harris and Ava. To his right is an empty seat. He himself insisted on leaving it, in memory of those who remained silent when they should have spoken. On the opposite side was a team of lawyers from Dalton and Price and Global Energy. Their faces were masks of self-confidence, but under the table, fingers were tapping nervously, papers were being flipped, and the edges of folders were being fidgeted with. Judge Hopewell, an elderly woman with a dry voice and a sharp gaze, opened the hearing. Case number 3127F, Crow-Trans vs. Dalton and Price and Global Energy. The allegation is an attempt to insert a hidden clause into a contract to transfer environmental and financial risks. Are the parties ready? Harris's voice was clear. "Yes, Your Honor." The defense attorney nodded reservedly. "Det den är sant." The first piece of evidence was the video. It was turned on right in the courtroom. When the laughter on the recording reached the phrase about the cleaning lady, a barely perceptible murmur ran through the courtroom. The cameras were clicking. Even the judge raised her eyebrows. "I dare to assume," Harris commented, "that the defense will not be able to refute the authenticity of this video?" "We are studying its origin," mumbled the opponent's lawyer. Harris merely nodded, like a surgeon confident in the precision of his incision. Next came the documents. Confirmation of the inclusion of paragraph G7, date of insertion, inconsistency with the rest of the wording. The SEC presented its findings. Everything was going according to plan, until the moment when Crow himself stood up. "I want to call a witness into the courtroom," he said. "Not an expert, not a lawyer. The person without whom we would never have reached this truth. Grace Miller." Silence reigned in the hall. Grace walked in calmly, out of uniform, in a modest gray dress and light makeup. She did not hide her eyes. She sat down at the podium. "Tell me," Harris asked. "Just how did you experience it?" Grace spoke, simply, without pathos. About the old floor, about fear, about how she was silent at first. And then she couldn't. With each phrase, the room became quieter. The judge did not interrupt. When Grace finished, there was not a single indifferent person in the room. Later in the corridors, one of the reporters asked, "Mr. Crow, you entrusted your company to a woman with no legal training. Why?" "Because she knew honor," Crow replied, "and that's more important than any diploma frame." There were weeks of investigations, appeals, publications ahead, but victory was already felt, because the truth could no longer be ignored. 6 months have passed. The Empire Tower was once again alive with life. People hurried along the corridors, meetings followed one another, calls and negotiations alternated with coffee breaks. But there was something new in the air. Something had changed forever. On one of the top floors, where the warehouse had been, was now the ethics department, a spacious, bright space where employees didn't hide behind bureaucracy but looked for the essence. It was run by Grace Miller. No longer a cleaner, but a senior coordinator for corporate integrity. Her office was simple. On the wall was a photograph of her and her husband. On the shelf were books on ethics, and next to it was a child's drawing. "Thank you, Aunt Grace," a gift from the child of one of the employees. She got used to her new role, not right away. There were doubts, fears, especially after the threat. But Avra's team, Crow's support, and the simple respect of her colleagues helped. Grace no longer felt invisible. People listened to her. People came to her for advice, sometimes just for a conversation. Alexander Crow changed his rhythm. He no longer woke up at 5:30. He allowed himself to come to the office later, to stay longer in the staff room, to drink coffee not alone but with others. He began to see people, and this changed him more than winning the court case. James Street was stripped of his partnership, and Dalton and Price suffered reputational damage. Global Energy was forced to reorganize, replacing half of its board of directors. The lawsuit was partially satisfied, but the moral victory for Crow and his team was complete. One morning, Grace stepped out of the elevator and saw an intern approaching her with paperwork. He sheepishly handed her a sheet of paper. "It's a memo. They say you have to approve the complaints procedure. I just didn't know where to take it." She smiled. "You took it to the right place." He nodded, and before leaving, he suddenly said, "Thank you for everything." Grace remained standing with the sheet in her hands. Behind the glass, the city lived its own life, hurried, breathed, made noise. But somewhere deep in its mechanisms, a voice was now working, quiet but steady. The voice that once said, "Don't sign," and changed everything. Friends, if you liked this story, subscribe to the channel and like it so you don't miss new interesting stories. Until next time.